Hello and welcome to the Dank Christian Memes podcast. My name is Broclen. I'm one of the moderators along with Jacob here, my better half in the moderating world. I'm also the digital minister and your host for our podcast here. I'm going to do a quick introduction here and then we'll come around to folks in more detail. Like I said, we've got Jacob here, who is my official co-host, our resident archaeologist. We've got Castor Troy, one of our other co-hosts and our resident pop culture and media analyst. And we've got SentientGorilla with us today. Sentient, I don't know that we got around to getting you a title, but I'm glad you're here with us. So I think, listen, I'm a little hyped. I did a weird thing yesterday that I never thought I'd do. I signed a contract that had my legal name, my legal address, but next to my legal name was my Reddit username, which means that like my Reddit username has some sort of like legal significance at this point in my life. But we signed a contract with Reddit Community Funds. Part of that contract dictates my wording. So we are now officially, what's the word? We are powered by Reddit Community Funds. And which means that on the final day of our fundraiser, they will double our donation amount up to $20,000. So that's a really exciting opportunity that, like I said, that happened less than 24 hours ago. So it's been a little crazy. I've been shouting it from the rooftops of Reddit, letting people know that if you donate to our fundraiser now, link in the description, that you can expect your donation to be doubled on April 10th, which is the final day of our fundraiser and when Reddit Community Funds gets in. So yeah, that's super exciting. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say on that. Am I missing anything? Am I assuming people understand what mistakes am I making here, Jacob? I can always rely on you for that.
I think you have it pretty well covered. To be perfectly honest, I was not aware until now that you had signed that. I've seen the discussions going on in the mod chats, but I've largely stayed out of it because you've been handling most everything.
I'm always a little shocked when my spam doesn't reach somebody, but it's okay. Like I said, links in the description here and pretty much everywhere else. So yeah, that's really exciting. But I also want to talk about are the Simpsons. So we have one of the great things about running our fundraiser for the second year is that folks are a little more familiar with us. So we've got more people, sort of seeing what we're up to and saying we'd like to get on board. So one of our new subs that we're partnering with is Are the Simpsons. Now, no one from their sub could be here today. They're busy people, so we appreciate that. But they don't mind us talking about how great the Simpsons is and reminding people of that, their sub is sort of equally great, or at least reflecting that greatness. So I figured we'd talk a little bit about the Simpsons today. Remind folks that Are the Simpsons is our partner, so feel free to check them out. If you maybe find that you like Are the Simpsons more than you like our Dank Christian Memes, if you do decide to donate, you could pick their sub and say that you're donating on their behalf to sort of represent your love of the Simpsons. We respect any of our subs. Anyone who wants to give money, you do in whatever name you like, and we're pretty excited about that. So let me first start off with the Simpsons itself. They started in 1989, and I hate to date myself, but I started in 1986. So I feel like my life has been running parallel The Simpsons. Troy, can you tell us a little bit about the beginnings of The Simpsons?
Yeah, sure. So they started out, the show itself started actually as a series of shorts on the Tracy Ullman show, I believe on HBO.
Was that like sketch comedies or like a SNL Mad TV kind of thing?
Yeah, so Tracy Ullman was a sketch comedy show on HBO, and just randomly, I believe the Simpsons were part of that show from the beginning of the Tracy Ullman show, and I believe that was in '87. And yeah, after a couple of seasons of just being shorts featuring just the family, not a lot of the extended characters that wouldn't come until much later, they were one of the original shows on Fox when Fox first started. A lot of people, especially, it's hard to imagine now, especially if you're younger than us men who are pushing 40, but Fox did not exist until like 1988. Like it was the channel that we know as one of the 4 major networks did not exist. And so it was one of the early shows that was on Fox, and it is one of the runaway successes for Fox in its early seasons. I believe by 1989, it was like the only Fox show to crack the top 20 in like ratings or something like that. Like
I feel like The Simpsons and Cops was just a lot of what Fox was doing for a while, and it was say what you will about it was pretty iconic of their network.
Oh yeah, well if you just quick history on Fox, like there was a time where Fox only had like 4 shows, like period 4 programs of their own original programming, and they just ran those all the time. So it was like a loop of Married with Children, Cops, The Simpsons, and like 2 other shows that were just always on. And yeah, The Simpsons just became a pillar of that network. And over, I believe, even by like season 3 or 4, it had already become like a cultural juggernaut. Like the merch was selling like hotcakes, and there was obviously, with any sort of that success, there became the controversies of the usual finger wagging of the time, like the standards and practices, like, the running joke from The Simpsons is, won't someone please think of the children? And what was happening is, a lot of people were having a very hard time disconnecting animated TV from children's TV. So they're like, kids shouldn't be watching The Simpsons. Like, no, it's a primetime show that comes on at like 8:00 on a Thursday. No, kids should not be watching The Simpsons. Like, kids can. It's just a sitcom like anything else, but it's not directed at children. But yeah, The Simpsons has been around for over 30 years now. It started in 1989, and it is, I think it's the longest running animated show ever. It is the longest running sitcom ever, and it is the longest running, I think, network show if you're not counting soap operas. It's like today, I think it has like something like 750 episodes. Like, so the show is running strong, apparently, even though I literally haven't watched a new episode of The Simpsons in probably 15 years, but it's still chugging along.
Yeah, I think one thing that made me realize, I watched The Simpsons up through college, and I found that when I was in elementary school, I met new friends. And it wasn't long before we were all quoting the episode of The Simpsons that had been on TV the night before. That The Simpsons became a sort of cultural language that allowed me to make sort of fast friends with people. And I thought that was obviously fantastic. But what really surprised me, I did my senior thesis in undergrad on disability history. So I was writing on dyslexia and special education. And there was an episode of The Simpsons that really perfectly typified special education when they moved to a new town only for that episode, Globex Corporation, I believe it is. And I was really surprised that my professor was like, no, The Simpsons is used as a comparison in academia quite a bit. So I was actually allowed to use it in my final presentation to the class on my thesis. So I was just surprised that The Simpsons has so much cultural currency that it can enable you to connect in different circles so readily. SentientGorilla, what was your first introduction to The Simpsons?
You're asking me what it was like at the beginning of the Big Bang. But if I had to think of the most memorable moment, or at least the first most memorable moment, it could be anything. I'd be hard pressed to pick one. But going back into it now as an adult, like I said, like I said earlier in the pre-show, about a month, maybe a month and a half ago, I just got the sudden idea. I have Disney Plus, and I'm thinking to myself, what show could I start that I should, that I like, but I haven't really sunk my teeth into? And it was The Simpsons. And really, I guess if I really had to go with something that really stood out to me about The Simpsons, it probably has to be the first episode that's on Disney Plus in season 1, which is the episode where they get Santa's little helper. Homer is unfortunately doesn't get a Christmas bonus from his Homer doesn't get a Christmas bonus, and then Bart does something dumb and goes and gets a tattoo, and unfortunately Marge thinks, okay, well, I'll just use our Christmas money that I saved in this jar, and then Homer will Homer's Christmas bonus will cover Christmas. Unfortunately, because Homer's Christmas bonus got canceled, there was no
Now,
money.
what was Homer's solution to this problem, though? Like he panicked when he realized that there was no bonus and there was no Christmas savings, but then he immediately runs out to the dog betting track, as if this is going to solve his problems.
Well, first, actually, he tries to get a part-time job as a Santa, and then the Santa,
Right, and Bart ruins it.
Yeah, it just ends up being awful. But I'll try not to be so long-winded, and I don't want to dominate the airwave. But essentially, what I took away from that episode, and what I think really, watching it back now as an adult, you really get the sense that the for all the criticisms and the how so many people were railing against the Simpsons, is basically saying that it was harmful to kids. The truth of the matter really is, to me, is that the Simpsons really had a lot of family values. They were a good family, and they had a lot of problems. They had their ups and downs, but at the end of the day, I really feel like the show, the overall themes of the show were about family, and there's a lot of episodes that are about fatherhood, and a lot of the lessons come through as wholesome and heartfelt, and I don't think that The Simpsons was as harmful to the family or to the nation as originally people wanted to make it out to be at the time.
I think that those early seasons, even by today's standards, are relatively mild, although there's a few themes. I feel like for a lot of the older generation, they looked at The Simpsons like a perverse The Flintstones, that they thought that cartoons of this nature should be family friendly, whereas The Simpsons was a satire. And I always thought something interesting about Springfield was that it kind of, I don't want to say it shows the worst, but it's not afraid to show the imperfections of society. Troy, is it fair to say that the show is a satire, or is that sort of an oversimplification?
No, I mean, it has always been Matt Groening, the creator, has always said, no, it's a satirical look at Americana and his specifically his suburban American life. He's from the Pacific Northwest. The Simpsons, other than Bart, because Bart is the analog for Matt Groening, the entire family is named after his family. It's always been a satire on just that, like that type of American life. And what people were getting all up in a tizzy about initially was that it wasn't showing a perfect family. It wasn't like a Happy Day scenario or a Brady scenario where everything was very soft and sugarcoated. I was like, no, sometimes dad's an idiot. Sometimes even mom, well-meaning, she has her issues, and the son is a troublemaker who actually gets in trouble. And the know-it-all daughter, even though she means well, can overstep. Like it was showing a perfectly imperfect family, and eventually started to spider out into obviously the town at large, because the show's been on for so long, they had to start focusing on other things. But yeah, it's always been a satire of just American family life. And people seeing that mirror put up to them was, whoa, no, you can't, you're demeaning the family. It's like, no, it's just showing this is what families were like. Yes, it's turned up a bit because it's a cartoon.
Oh, Troy, are you still with us? You went in and out very briefly.
Oh, which parts did you not hear?
I think you were pointing out, sort of people's expectations versus the cartoon that The Simpsons turned out to actually be.
Yeah, sorry. I don't want to cut out. But no, I was just saying, like, it's a satirical look at just normal American life, and people didn't like that it showed imperfections. It didn't like that it showed not necessarily the ugly side, but not the side where dad was always right and mom was always right, and and the kids could get in real trouble and things like that. It was very much here's a mirror, here's American life, here's how you and your family actually are, not your Instagram filtered version, even though that wasn't a term yet. But it was very much a satirical, heightened look at what Matt Groening thought was his American life, his upbringing.
Now, before we move forward here, I want to check in with Jacob and make sure that he still has a pulse, and that he's well, that his vital signs are okay. Jacob, you confessed before that you're not really a big watcher of The Simpsons or at all. What has your perception been of the show's reputation as someone who is, shall we say, perhaps a bit younger than the olds up here on stage right now?
I would say that there are three sides of it. There's me as the person who has existed in a culture where it's always been present. There's me who is a fan of Futurama and South Park, two different shows that have a heavy relationship with the show. And then there's me as the Oregonian who knows that Springfield, Oregon is the Springfield in the show. And so
I can believe that.
I'll start with the first one, which is that I don't think I've ever been unaware of it. I think the first memory I have of it was actually the Simpsons Road Rage video game and playing that at someone's house.
I've heard good things about that game.
It was very fun as a kid. It was basically before I had a concept of what Grand Theft Auto the series was. It fulfilled that role of a driving game where you went crazy.
It's just a GTA clone with Simpsons and Springfield as the backdrop. I think it's one of the first fully 3D realized versions of Springfield up to that point because nobody had ever actually really mapped it out. So yeah, it's Simpsons Road Rage actually surprisingly fun.
Yeah, I used to play that at a friend's house, and that was my actual first exposure with the media that I am aware of. But also I have very long watched Futurama, which obviously is also created by Matt Groening. And I've watched that one multiple times through. It's a lot more my flavor, I think. And, the two shows have a relationship where they're by the same creator. They are both satires on American society. The aesthetic is just different. And I think they're probably far more similar than they are different, but yeah.
In the early Simpsons, I always found Bart and Lisa to be the sort of grounding characters for which the experience would make most sense in a lot of circumstances, obviously, because I was younger at the time. I remember watching Futurama when it first came out and not really being into it until I was old enough to understand, sort of my college experience and sort of post-college. I needed to be a little closer to where Fry was in life before I could fully grasp and appreciate Futurama. But that's mostly just me dating myself again. I apologize.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that made Futurama stand out for me as a kid was the fact that when it takes these retro futurist concepts that I generally liked from fiction that were popular in the early 2000s. Of course, it largely draws from the sort of mid-century sci-fi aesthetic that it uses satirically to represent the modern day, because all of the issues that are commented on, I think similarly to The Simpsons, are actually current issues that are within American society, but dressed up in a way to be slightly detached from a serious tone. And so for Futurama specifically, the retro futurist aesthetic, which is also what I like and what attracted me to the show, is what creates that separation where it's supposed to be this is how someone from the past would look at the future. Someone from a few decades ago would look at our time. And then the third thing, the third relationship that I have with The Simpsons is the fact that Matt Groening is from Portland, and I am from the Portland area, and there is a town called Springfield in basically near Eugene, several hours south of here, where there is a mural that Groening helped put up celebrating The Simpsons in the town. He has put out and then retracted a statement that Springfield, Oregon is the inspiration for Springfield in the Simpsons. So I think even though the general vibe that they put out is supposed to be that since there's a Springfield in most states, it could be any American town, but Oregonians know differently across the board. It's like a very well-known fact that Springfield in The Simpsons is a sort of mirror of Springfield, Oregon, and the experiences of Oregonian life in particular.
Well, I don't want to offend anyone on that side of the country, but I do know that there are people in Massachusetts who are well convinced that Springfield is their Springfield, especially because Joe Quimby speaks with a bit of an accent. It doesn't make them right, but that's Massachusetts. We in New England have to apologize for them regularly.
Well, that's actually, funnily enough, that's just the thing with people, because there is a Springfield in pretty much every state. If you're around one of them, they all claim to be the Springfield. I think, like Jacob was saying, Oregon has the biggest claim. Like Matt Groening has being from there, saying he's modeled the show after his family and his life. Like that is the real claim. But they lean into the fact that it could be anywhere as the show goes on. Because keep in mind, like they drive to New York from Springfield, but they also like border multiple states. Like they've shown that in
and deserts for some reason.
Like they have like deserts that they can get to, which are all within a shot of Springfield. Like the Springfield Gorge doesn't make sense anywhere on the Northeast. It only would make sense like in the Pacific Northwest or sometimes the Southwest. So yeah, like the prevailing thing of Springfield being any town USA became part of the joke. It's like we can just do whatever the hell we want because Springfield is everywhere.
I think one of the things about the show, I think, so I always grew up going to church, and I really liked that the way they showed people attending church and the variety of people that at the time that was actually pretty representative. But I thought one of the most compelling commentaries was sort of like love your neighbor between Homer and Ned. And I guess the most concise way to describe Ned Flanders is as a well-meaning Bible thumper. But Homer is just in many ways, the most unlikable neighbor that a person could have, to the extent where he pretty much is stealing from Ned on a semi-regular basis. So I always thought that relationship between, Ned and Homer was one of the core themes of the show. I don't know if they really intended it that way, or if it just sort of played that way to my, somewhat more religious upbringing.
I think what you're calling out, and it's a projection of things, and I mean that in a good way, not in a negative way. And I'm going to tie it back to another show just for a sec. I've been listening to the Boy Meets World podcast, Pod Meets World, which is pretty good. And if you're a fan of Boy Meets World, you should give it a listen. But the podcasters, it's Daniel Fishel, Ryder Strong, and Will Friedle, who played Topanga, Sean, and Eric on the show. And they said what they're noticing now watching the show as adults is that they focus more on what the adults are doing in the show. When they were kids and when our age, when we were watching it as children, yeah, we focused on the main children because that was our point of view. They were analogs for us. And then now as you get older, you realize oh no, this is what was happening with the adults. The storylines that I thought were boring or not as good actually have some meat to them. And I think, and so tie it back to The Simpsons, what it is because as the show went on, they were able to cast such a wide with that archetype. So like you're saying, Broclen, with you being more religious coming up, I wasn't. So I always thought that stuff was like, oh, this is fun. That's there. Like, of course, I go to church every now and again, but I wasn't as connected to the religious part of the Ned Flanders Homer relationship. It was just like, no, it's weird that he hates his neighbor and his neighbor's the nicest dude in the world. He's just an annoying Bible thumper sometimes. And Homer objectively is the worst neighbor. So like if anybody should be upset, it should have been Ned. And so but The Simpsons is full of stuff like that, like where you could find like, oh, that relates to me. I'm picking up on this thing that maybe my friend isn't, because that's not his worldview, or that's not something that they would focus on. And I think The Simpsons was at its best was really good at stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to ask you a question about a specific character, Sentient Gorilla. What was your perception of Reverend Lovejoy in terms of, the sort of main Christian clergy shown in the show?
I want to answer that with two answers, and the first answer is that as my exposure. Sorry, I stammer a lot. I'll try to not. But my experience with the show when I was younger was a lot different, and I didn't really understand religion at the time. I didn't understand my religion. I thought that I did, but now that I'm on the other side and I'm of my adolescence, and now that I'm an adult, I see the Reverend as a lot more cranky. I don't think he's necessarily a bad guy, but I think I think that if we're going to look at the Reverend as a real person, we have to realize that he probably started being a pastor with a lot of passion, and he probably was very on fire for Jesus, as the phrase goes. But I think what happens in normal regular life, when you start something that you have a strong passion for, once you've been doing it for a very, very long time, your enthusiasm starts to wear down. And I think that even people that strongly follow their religion, I think that there's a lot about their faith and their Christianity that starts to make them more jaded over time. And I think that so, I mean, I told you I was going to give you two answers. So the first answer is I didn't really understand the character when I was younger, but now as an adult, I understand him more as just a cranky adult that no longer has passion for his calling.
And what you said is absolutely right. There's an episode where he sort of reveals he came out of seminary to Springfield's church, and he was on fire for the Lord. And Ned Flanders and his constant calls and problems that weren't problems, including but not limited to coveting his own wife, just wore him down really, really bad over time. I believe in that same episode, he's just neglected pastoral care overall because so much of it is Ned. And then when Marge offers to be the listen lady with just, really little more than her motherly charms, she helps a lot of people, although she gives some pretty bad advice to Ned as well. So, Reverend Lovejoy at least has that high moment in his career. But I always thought he was just a really interesting commentary. And I think that I'm glad that they gave an episode where there's more background, where we know, what wore him down and why he has so little patience for Ned in general. It makes me think that if other things were set aside, that Reverend Lovejoy and Homer might have more in common than you'd realize just in their hatred of Ned Flanders on the day-to-day. But Matt Groening was he? I don't know if he was raised Christian and converted to Unitarian Universalism, or if he was raised Unitarian Universalist, which you can be a Christian or pretty much anything in the Unitarian Church. So I always thought that his perspective on religion was perfectly critical sometimes, but also relatively charitable. Has that been your perspective from the sort of outside perspective, Troy?
In terms of his religious upbringing, or just in general?
From my perspective, he seems to have a certain level of affection for religious topics where it doesn't feel like he's being outright offensive to me. I'd be interested to know what, any of the rest of you think on that subject.
I think so. I'm gonna reference I guess I can reference the single Simpsons episode I watched, because it is about religion, and the a certain Futurama episode, which I think give two different insights. The Simpsons episode I watched was while I was living in Jerusalem, and it's the one where they go to Jerusalem, because my then girlfriend at the time was like, "We need to watch this," because she was a big fan of the show and kept referencing it in relation to the city, and I and she was bothered by the fact that I had not seen it. And so there's this episode where Ned basically organizes a trip to the Holy Land and brings Homer along and his family, and Homer ends up with Jerusalem syndrome, which, if you're not familiar with it, is the pattern of certain people going to Jerusalem and deciding they have a holy calling. So he decides he's the Messiah in this case.
Oh boy.
And he brings the episode ends with him basically trying to bring together Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in peace, based on the fact that they all like to eat chicken. But
that sounds like a very Homer theology.
It is. I think it emphasizes this this sort of effective agnosticism that I think the show illustrates, where religion isn't a good or a bad thing, but it's something that, like, there isn't a way to be exactly right in. And that's where I'd compare it with the Futurama episode where Bender ends up drifting through space, and an asteroid,
Godfellas.
Yes, an asteroid hits him, and he gets a small civilization living on him that treats him as a god. And in this episode, he messes it up and eventually encounters what is a computer entity that is implied to be the actual god of the universe. And the line essentially, or the ending line of the episode, is that if you are a good god and do your job right, I don't remember the exact wording,
if you
people
do ever
wonder if you're there at all.
Haven't done anything at all. It's one of my favorite quotes in any media of anything.
Yeah, I think it illustrates, if we can assume that the entire studio has Matt Groening's sort of ideology being pushed through these episodes. It probably has more than one person giving input on these sorts of things in reality, but I think the pattern illustrated between these things and between much of the rest of these shows is that he has a view of religion that is not negative, but rather as a facet of society that exists in different ways, that ultimately does not have an answer that he feels able to point to, but rather recognizes the legitimacy of the existence of multiple answers. I think that's the ideology of the show, of both shows, as I would assume relevant to religion.
For me, I think it's not disagreeing with anything you said, Jacob. I think a lot of Groening's point, especially when it comes to religion, is there's no one answer. And it's a lot of people looking for one answer. And that's why you have in The Simpsons, you have, depending on what character is speaking to their God, they see the God that they want to see. Homer saw a very Eurocentric, white flowing hair and robes and that version of heaven. But you also have characters like Apu, who's Hindi. Like, they've addressed this in The Simpsons, where when you learn about various characters' religions, and no one religion is treated as better or worse than the other. It's just that we follow The Simpsons, so that is the prevailing religion that we're going to see the most of. Also, I think a nice touch in The Simpsons is to show that the God that The Simpsons, specifically Homer or Flanders, speaks to, sees in their Christianity, is actually human and not a Simpsons character. And it's a little touch because all the Simpsons have 4 fingers, every single one. Every character in The Simpsons has 4 fingers, except for the version of God that they see. He has 5. Just like you're going to talk to, you're going to get the answers that your real answers are going to come in the way that you need them, not necessarily the way that you want them. And I think that's been prevailing through all of Matt Groening's work, but especially in The Simpsons when it comes to religion.
I as you could probably guess, I enjoy a good joke about religion. And I thought one thing, you mentioned Apu, so I'm going to move in that direction. And Apu's been, there's been a lot of opinions about Apu out there lately. So one thing I wanted to talk about is like how the show has changed over time. And I also want to acknowledge that, some characters like Apu, he's not the only one, I think, have sort of a checkered reputation at this point. But I thought one thing that was helpful for me about Apu is it made Hinduism, something I learned about in textbooks, feel more real. And like little jokes like "Do not offer my god a peanut" to a shrine of Ganesha that Apu had up was like actually pretty like, don't be like Homer, respect other people's religions. Like there's some real teachable moments in there for that. But I'm sure there's other people who look at that and aren't perhaps as charitable.
I mean, to address and no pun intended here, but to address the elephant in the room, The Simpsons, because it is so ubiquitous and so large and so popular and so long lasting, the issue with Apu specifically, I know we're going to talk about that, and the backlash to all this stuff, it was literally just one blogger prominently saying, a prominent blogger or journalist, I don't want to discredit what they do, but they were just saying like, hey, Simpsons, you're a lot of people's only real information about not only Hinduism, but this ethnicity of people. And yes, everything in The Simpsons as it is a stereotype or archetype or characterization turned up to 11. But when there's only one Hindi character, when there's only one Asian character, and that's what they were pointing out, it's like there does become a duty of sorts to treat that with respect. And it's not that they were treating it with disrespect. It's just they were pointing out, it's like, this is your one Hindi character and it's voiced by a white man. And so if you're like, but the Simpsons reaction to that was to remove the character. And then they wrote into like storylines where they had Lisa, who was always the most level-headed of the Simpsons characters, like basically bash back at the critique of their usage of the characters. It's like, oh, we're a long-standing show and nobody's complained before. Like, these are actual lines that come out of Lisa's mouth while a picture of Apu is next to her, and then she looks directly at the camera. And I think the writing crew at that point in time had taken the wrong turn there. They had taken like a really weird stance on a level-headed critique that's just like, hey, like, we get that the stereotype is part of the game, but just be mindful of things like that. Be mindful of the power that your show and your characters have. And I think The Simpsons got it wrong in that regard initially. I do think they eventually came back around, and Harry Shearer, like, and a few of the other voice actors, Hank Azaria, and they all like kind of acknowledged, like, no, yeah, we could be better about how we portray and who portrays certain parts, which is fine. I just don't, but there's nothing wrong inherently with looking at that and addressing that. I'm like, oh yeah, we could be doing better about this. And I think the other thing is just, and it's more of a simple, pragmatic thing, is The Simpsons is largely voiced by like 6 people. Like that entire cast is like, I think a little bit more than half a dozen people. So yeah, of course, there's going to be times where people are voicing different genders, ethnicities, and things of that nature. And it's like, yeah, we just don't want to pay for more voice actors. We got this talented cast. We're going to use them. So I think that's fair, but I also think it's like, no, there's nothing wrong with looking at a long-standing institution and saying there's room to fix certain things that you're doing.
When I did my homework, what I found was a diversity of opinions among fans, among critics, among culture analysts and commentators. But I think that there are folks that felt seen in a positive way by Apu. I think there's folks like myself for whom Apu helped, nod towards actual real people who actually really exist. And I always felt like Apu was one of the more commendable characters in The Simpsons. He was college educated. He was not only was he a hard worker, but he was like courageous and being like almost routinely robbed. So like Apu has like legitimate battle scars. But, I would actually, in my studies go to a Hindu temple and see statues of, among other deities, Ganesha, and be, obviously The Simpsons didn't educate me, but it was a reminder that the things I read about in textbook are real, and that the people who, might be seen by this character are real. On the other hand, I know that there's, like you said, The Simpsons is seen by so many people in so many different contexts. Some people were abused in the name of the character. And so I can't be at all surprised when those people feel like, the character feels like a slur because, that was the association made. And I feel like that's equally valid. When it comes to what the show should do, I have no idea. And I'm thankful to have no idea and not have to have an idea.
And that was the thing I was bring up is like the people that were specifically the one person who was critiquing the character of Pooh wasn't even saying that the character itself is bad. It's like, hey, it does lean into some stereotype tropes. I mean, running a convenience store is very much an Indian stereotype in America. And they were just saying like, hey, you've been on the air for I think the Apu issue thing, I think it was 2014. So the show had been on for 25 years at that point. It's like, hey, your show's been on for 25 years. You've given Apu a wife and a whole gang of kids. You could broaden the character a little bit more or introduce more Hindi characters so that way he doesn't have to be the catch-all for everything. That was basically the critique. And then that's where all the other voices came in saying, you can't critique. It's been 25 years. Why are you bringing this up now? And I hate that argument for things. It's like, just because you ignored the critique when it was day one doesn't mean it wasn't happening between day one and year 25. It's just now that person had a platform where more people could hear about it. And among other people who have been saying similar things for years that just were getting drowned out. But at least I don't recall any of the initial critiques ever saying, remove Apu, he's bad, he's demeaning. It was just like, hey, like I said, a lot of people see this and this is their only representation of Hinduism, of an Indian American, that sort of thing. Just do better by him and characters like him. And that they were using Apu, but there was a bunch of one-note characters that exist in the Simpsons universe because, again, small-ish cast, big old universe they built over time. What they should do, I also don't have an answer, but like I said, I don't think looking at what your work has been or what it is inherently wrong and and I think they took the critique the complete wrong way initially.
I also feel like and this is once again an outside perception. When hearing about that controversy, I tend to wonder if to an extent the size of the Simpsons on the cultural platform lends itself in a way that other similar media usages of such characters aren't. Like, for example, I'm a big fan of Phineas and Ferb, which I grew up watching, and which I still occasionally watch. And it has, the character Baljeet, who is very similarly a highly stereotypical Indian character who is obsessed with schoolwork, coddled by his parents, fulfills many of the stereotypes of the school smart, socially awkward Asian school student who is with parents with high expectations, right? He embodies that specific stereotype. But I've never actually seen any real discussion of that in the public arena in a critical way. I think it's just a given that he is allowed to be there in that role by most fans of the show, probably because for many people, he's a representative character who represents a way they probably legitimately experience, but also he's framed in a positive way. And I think that's probably comparable to my understanding of a lot of the ways that Apu appears. But he has so many more eyes on him from so many more generations, and such a much larger audience that there will be more criticism.
I wanted to shift a little bit to a different kind of controversy. So I liked watching through The Simpsons. In my house, we come back to the Treehouse of Horror Simpsons for our Halloween because that's just a lot of fun. But one thing I noticed was there was I forget the title of the episode, but it's the episode where Homer is in a mental institution and he encounters someone who thinks that they are Michael Jackson. And Troy, stop me if I'm wrong, but I think the actor is actually voiced by Michael Jackson. But the episode itself is actually removed. And I'm guessing because of the sort of concerns with abuse around Michael Jackson himself and the fact that he's interacting with children in the episode, it seems like Disney Plus, rather than adding their usual cultural note, decided to just not have that episode in the mix. And I was a little surprised. But, you know, obviously it's not the end of the world. It still exists out there if someone really, really wants to see it. But I think it's just another example of how a show that's existed so long is, you know, bound to, you know, kind of span a cultural space and be seen from many different cultural perspectives over time, sort of like you were saying.
It could also be because the role of a mental institution as a place to contain people who are like coded as crazy within a show's paradigm has some real historic negative baggage that maybe Disney was wary of as well.
Well, and it's hard to see, you know, is it a sympathetic take acknowledging how institutions like that are maybe not so great, or are we poking fun at a vulnerable situation? And maybe it's both. And like I said, so many cultural perspectives, people will see, you know, any number of different takes.
I don't even think it's so much a bunch of culture perspectives on that one. I think that's just a cut and dry business decision. Like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have the Michael Jackson episode on our streaming service. Like, that's just a little bit icky. Fun fact, I'm putting fun in quotes there. Yes, Michael Jackson does actually voice the character while he's speaking. He does not voice him while he's singing. Michael Jackson's vocal rights were way too expensive, and they didn't want to get caught into like some legal thing with his record label. Because Michael Jackson was a huge fan of The Simpsons. That's why he did the episode. But yeah, his record label they were weary about him singing on the show and giving away his voice like that. So, and I don't believe he's actually. While Michael Jackson does do the actual voice, I don't think he's actually credited in the episode. I think he used like a different name to be credited for that.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that difference. There's been so many people to sort of make a guest presence or to be a reference on The Simpsons. I wonder how many, you know, tiny scandals or whatever you would want to think of them as. I just wouldn't even think of. Some of you are invisible to me right now, but I'd still be hearing you, Troy. So I guess you're still with us just as a ghost.
I don't see him either, to clarify. I just reloaded the page a moment ago.
I've been seeing you all drop in and out, like your avatars, but your vocals have still been coming through. So
are we being canceled in real time? Is this how it happens? Oh my goodness.
The void.
Well, you know, we are coming up on the end of our time. I wanted to throw out one more mini scandal and get your guys' perspective on this. Like I said, I loved The Simpsons growing up. I videotaped episodes. I lived in an area where I could get some channels from New York, so I could watch an additional showing of episodes. So I'd sometimes watch the same episode a couple hours apart. You could say I had a problem, but it was a pretty bright spot in my time growing up. But, you know, one thing I think is a little interesting looking back is the ongoing joke of Homer choking Bart, which is a real caricature, but also like kind of pokes fun and makes light of like actual abuse. And like Homer is also like a not so low key alcoholic through the entire show as well. So like we were talking about, like, you know, flawed families can be wholesome families can be flawed. And The Simpsons likes to play jump rope with that. But you know, there are some times where I'm like, oh, you know, I don't know how well this episode plays anymore, but I imagine they're still in syndication somewhere. So maybe it's not a problem, or maybe this is something that there will be a bunch of bloggers commenting on in a few months. I don't know.
I would like to mention, and
I don't necessarily see it as a problem. I mean, that is art. Art captures the artist's interpretation of the time that they are in. So like saying things like it doesn't play well today, like it probably didn't play well then either, or it did, but it's looking at something from the past with a new lens doesn't then make that thing bad. It just makes it a capsule of what the time was. And so, yeah, they do make light of basically Homer throttling Bart all the freaking time. And, yes,
well, and it's a hilarious image. His tongue is like ejected from his mouth in a way that is just simply not possible. It's almost like a Tex Avery style cartoon moment. But also it's real for a lot of people.
Well, that's my thing. It is still a cartoon. It is a cartoon that, again, comes on at prime. Like, it's not, children can watch The Simpsons. It's never been made for children. These are jokes for adults to look at and go like, oh,
and
man.
that's why I kept it a secret. I knew that The Simpsons could be taken away. I knew that other people were banned from watching The Simpsons. So I knew that if no one knew I was watching The Simpsons, no one could ban me from watching The Simpsons. So you're absolutely right. And that was, sort of my look through the glass. Sentient Gorilla, what were you trying to say?
I was going to mention that as my roommate and I were going through the episodes, and by the way, we're in the middle of season 3 right now. There were several episodes that we watched, and we realized, there are moments where Homer really connects with his kids. There are moments where he really delivers on how to be a good dad, but just as often, he's actually a pretty crappy guy. Like, he's a terrible friend to Ned Flanders. We saw
not a great husband. Not a lot of husband points on Homer.
Yeah, not too much. I don't know because I haven't seen the entire series, but from what I understand, I don't think he's actually ever cheated on Marge. But don't spoil me on it though. If that's coming up, I'm going to want to see it myself. But there were moments, like specifically the episode where Ned Flanders opens up his leftatorium or whatever, his store with stuff for left-handed people. Homer actively encourages his business to fail. And then it's only when his business actually fails, like he's mentally, like they show him mentally wishing his business to fail. And then when his business actually does, Homer turns the corner at the mall and his jaw drops and he's like, oh my gosh, the business actually fell. And then he feels responsible. And then it's only at the end of the episode that he's somehow the good guy and comes out, smelling like roses because he was able to finally get everybody to shop at Ned Flanders' place when he should have been doing that in the first place. And that's just one example of Homer being absolutely crappy. Another example is the child abuse. Look, I appreciate that you guys want to call it a cartoon, or excuse it, the portrayal of child abuse because it's a cartoon and it is funny and it is silly, but I've got to call it like I want to not wear rose tinted glasses and really call it out and say, look, that's child abuse and that's what Homer is doing. And I'm, pardon me for taking off the sugar-coated topping, but I just want to call it what it is.
Well, and they acknowledge that at one point. There's a point where Homer throttles Bart, and I think Homer had done something so despicable that Marge then throttles Homer in response, which obviously isn't the right response, but it's the only time that there had ever been a response to that.
The interpretation of rose-colored glasses or sugar-coated topping, I think it's just saying, yes, this is what that thing is, and this is their interpretation, or this is what they're trying to depict. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, or I'm not saying it's right at all. I'm saying they're doing that for comedic effect. They're putting comedic effect on violence. That's right. That's an animation staple. Like, we've been watching that for years. We watch Bugs Bunny shoot people in the face. And it's like, oh, that's funny. It's like that. I'm saying I'm calling out as animation because that's the only place you could get away with that type of comedy.
Absolutely. And I'm not calling
live action the same way.
I'm not calling for it to, like, I'm not calling for any, like, but look, I guess let me clarify my position on it a little bit. I'm not saying that they shouldn't show that anymore, or they shouldn't do that, or that there's something wrong with The Simpsons, because there's not. When they obviously, as we're talking here, they have acknowledged when they, mess up and they could do things differently, and when they, want to be a little bit, when they want to change things and they address it, and they do, and I think that's great. And at the end of the day, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with them having those scenes, especially the Homer choking Bart. As a cartoon, I don't think it's morally wrong to show that. It's again, my only issue is that I want to make sure that, at least I want to make sure that as an audience, when people are watching that, they can enjoy the humor and fun side of it. But at the end of the day, it's got to be acknowledged that what's going on is Homer, hurting his son.
And I think that's one thing that we've been actually okay with. And Troy, I'd love to know your opinion on this, that we're pretty good. Like back in the day, we created the television rating system. The Simpsons was always PG. And that there's, even today on streaming networks, Disney Plus, and I'm sure others do something similar as well, where they leave a cultural note saying, yeah, there's some stuff here either in this show or in this episode in particular. And they show it, but with that note and with that acknowledgement. And I think that, that's sort of what our conversation here is nodding to, that it is still, the sort of art represents life represents art paradigm. But you can look at it in a nuanced way. Castor Troy, are you still with us or did you disconnect? I can't tell.
Oh no, I'm here. I'm absolutely. Can you hear me? I'm here.
So what is your thoughts on sort of, labeling this stuff as we see it so folks know what they're walking into with an episode or a TV show? Is that something that's working, or is that something that's just too much work and not really having an effect?
Well, I mean, it's like you just said, it's just the rating system. Whether or not people acknowledge and adhere to that rating system in terms of, oh, I'm seeing that this is not The Simpsons in general, but itself, but like, if I'm watching something that says this is TVMA for strong violence and graphic nudity and all this sort of stuff, and then I watch that episode and go, man, there was a lot of nudity in that. I got to tell somebody. It's like, well, they told you up front. They're like, what did you think that those words were at the beginning? I think a lot of people tend to just glaze over what that stuff can mean. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that's what you're doing, SentientGorilla. I'm just saying just people at large. So yeah, the rating systems work for what they're supposed to be doing, giving you a heads up. Hey, this kind of stuff might be in this TV show. Approach that how you will, and see it. It's also when you're talking about people's interpretation of how they view things, it's going to hit people different ways. For lack of a better term, since we're talking about child abuse in this conversation, but yeah, it's going to certain people are going to take things differently and take them differently depending on your own personal triggers, your own personal biases. That's just humanity. I will say, SentientGorilla, you said don't spoil anything for you. Slight spoilers, they do scale back on the child abuse and the throttling thing because as time went on, people were calling it out. It's like, yo, Homer's always choking the hell out of his kids. You have mind something else for comedy, but you're only in season 3, and that was kind of like, that's one of the tent poles. That's one of the big comedic beats of the show at that point. I think by around like season 9-ish, so we're talking about like later 90s. Yeah, they start scaling back on that completely. Like it happens.
We're also talking about the 90s, the decade of the nut shot, and like that was sort of the comedy currency of the day, for better or for worse.
It wasn't anything different than what was already happening on TV. So it's just a well that they went to often. And then over time, as viewers were getting older, as viewers were getting just more, are increasing their vocabulary and recognizing certain things that shouldn't be viewed as funny in that way. A bunch of shows started toning that stuff down, but Simpsons, because it was so popular, it was the big one. And there was backlash to that when people were like, when they're like, hey, we're going to kind of tone down the violence in this way. They cut out Itchy and Scratchy pretty after a while, or at least stop using them as much. They toned down on Homer beating on his freaking kids. And people were like, oh, they're being too PC. And it's like, well, come on. You have to recognize that, yes, this is old hat at this point. We don't have to keep mining this.
A gag that's been running for a decade. Maybe it's best to be, put to a timely rest.
Yeah.
I mean, well, speaking of being put to a timely rest, I know that we're running out of time here, but I wanted to address the part of the criticism. I want to address the criticism of basically people really feel like The Simpsons has run its course and that it's been on for 20 plus years at this point, and some people feel like the writing is terrible. In fact, I had jumped ahead and saw a couple of later seasons of The Simpsons, a couple of episodes.
It gets pretty rough, man.
You could go back to the very first episode and the writing is just so much better. It's so simple in its execution, but it's so much better than something in like season 15 and up, But I want to go ahead and real quickly also point out a couple of my favorite moments from The Simpsons, which I think are super important because specifically the episode where Homer steals cable. It's like season 2 or the end of season 1, but he steals cable, and Lisa goes to church, which is interesting because later on in the series, Lisa, I believe, becomes a little bit more agnostic, maybe even closer to atheist. But and at the beginning in that episode, Lisa herself ends up having a crisis of conscience. She has a moral crisis when she's worried that her family and herself are going to go to hell because her dad is stealing cable. And the episode becomes very heartfelt, and Homer initially doesn't want to get rid of the cable, but there's a scene in that episode where Marge says to Homer that she's afraid that the cable television that he's stealing is bringing an evil presence in her home. She says it, and her eyes move in a way that's quite spooky. And also, that is also the point is driven home when Bart is caught several times watching pornography and
selling views of that pornography to the neighborhood, nonetheless, in certain. This is something Bart's done multiple times, I'm pretty sure.
It is my personal belief. I don't know how everybody here feels, but it is my personal belief that pornography is really an evil tool of the devil. Like, I believe it is really a demonic entity, and I really love that episode for just really like showing how one small simple act that seems innocent enough that, probably isn't hurting anybody, but is still technically stealing, can snowball into a series of actions that, regardless of whether or not you believe in demonic powers, can really snowball into having a negative influence on your family. And just wanted to point that out. And then
I think you've highlighted one of the great moments of like, well, now I know I'm an adult because I'm identifying with Marge, and and maybe that's not so bad at the end of the day.
Just to take things back a little bit to what you're saying earlier, SentientGorilla, that's what's the reason The Simpsons has been able to run as long as it has, even though I think it's well run a little bit too long at this point, which is why I haven't watched it in about 15 years. It's always going to start from the basis of, yes, this is an imperfect family. Homer's not that great of a person, but he'll come around. There's certain lines he won't cross. There's certain things that certain characters like that they just won't do. Over time, I think they've had to retcon that, and that's why it makes the show so inconsistent later. But going back to what you said, like, he actively wished for the demise of his annoying neighbor's business, and then seeing that, like, oh crap, I put that in the universe, it came true. I don't want that. That is a constant thing for Homer. Like, throughout the 30-year run of the series, he's constantly doing things to wrong his friends and his family, and he realizes he has to go through his growth arc every episode, essentially like, oh yeah, I messed that up, let me go try to make amends. And yes, it's very hokey sitcom-y that everything comes together perfectly at the end of the episode, but that's just TV, especially of the time. But yeah, like, Homer is very much an imperfect he's a human character in that way. Not all of us are perfect. Like, I don't actively wish on anyone's demise, but I've definitely been like, man, that dude's kind of a douche. I hope something bad happens to him. And it's like, oh, I don't want that. And I go through that as a human. To put that into a TV show, it has to be a little bit more extreme and a little bit more like formulaic, especially for people to just watch that and be like, oh, this is what's happening. So yeah, that you're going to see that throughout the run of the show, and you're going to see moments when you're watching it later. You're like, Marge should not have gone back to Homer. Homer should not have any more friends. Bart should be expelled and put in prison right now. But that's just the way the show works. And it's so wild to watch. For me, I don't say wild, but it's interesting and fascinating for me as someone who grew up with The Simpsons, who watched it as it ran, and it was a cultural touchstone that had total ubiquity. Everybody, if you didn't actively watch it, you knew about it. And now hearing people that are way younger than me approaching it basically in a binge model, where it's like, oh, we're just watching episodes here and there, and you're not seeing the things that they are specifically either connected to, like seeing the cultural references that they're making fun of or that they're calling back to. You're just taking it as the art that is being presented to you on its own merits. And it's very interesting to hear that feedback. They're making fun of XYZ show and this XYZ movie. It's just like, no, this is just a weird thing that's happening to these yellow people on my TV right now.
Yeah, I can appreciate the sort of like, sometimes you read check out The Simpsons and you have sort of the mind of an academic, like I did when I used it for my senior thesis. And other times you're just shutting off your brain, watching some TV that in my case, I've seen a million billion times before. So the last thing I want to say about The Simpsons is for anyone like Jacob who isn't in on it, I would say watch The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episodes. I feel like that it has a lot of entertainment and a lot of sort of spoof value because they're usually referencing something else in pop culture. So that's my final thought on The Simpsons. Any other final thoughts as we get ready to close up here?
Jacob, I think you should start at the very beginning of the series and just chug on through. But I mean, not to step on you, Mr. Broclen. But that's how I'm sinking my teeth back into it, and it is so rewarding. I cannot tell you how much. Like there are moments where I'm watching and I'm having heartfelt moments. Especially the episodes that are very fatherly. The themes that are have fatherhood underlying them. There are moments where it definitely elicits a strong emotional reaction from me, and I just wanted to really quickly mention that there's a scene in an episode where Homer is actually, everybody thinks he's going to die because he goes to a Japanese restaurant and eats a fugu fish. And the chefs are like, we just fed you something that's going to kill you. And so he goes to the doctor. The doctor tells him, Homer, you only have a day to live. I think that was the first time and probably the only time again, don't tell me if it happens again, but there was a time in that episode as Homer is going to sleep and expecting to be able to wake up in the morning. He's going to sleep. They show him and Marge going to bed naked. Marge has she's holding the sheet over herself, over the front of herself. But you see her back is, flesh colored. It's completely nude. And it's heavily implied in that episode that Marge and Simpson are making love as husband and wife for the last time. And I don't know that they've ever done that before or done that since. I thought that it was a very beautiful scene. And I don't know if you guys remember, but at the end of that episode, Homer goes downstairs and he listens to an audiobook version of the Bible, and he wakes up.
Larry King, voiced by Larry King,
and he wakes up, and he's alive, and it's a miracle, and nobody knows how, but I'm kind of getting a little emotional thinking about it now, but it's really one of my favorite episodes. Really beautiful. Thanks, guys, for letting me hog up all the airtime.
Best Simpsons episodes that they ever did, and they knocked it out. That's early. I think that's like season 2. Yeah, that's a top Simpsons episode right there.
Well, and it's great that a piece of art or a cartoon or however you choose to look at it, if you're open to it, that maybe you can have a sort of emotional moment, which is nice. I like to feel things from now to then.
I would say that would be part of my final thoughts on The Simpsons. If we're wrapping up here, it's especially if you watched it when you were younger and haven't revisited, or if it wasn't just a part of your, like, I'm much like you, Brock, and it was just, I would watch The Simpsons all the freaking time and just have it on. And another fun fact, The Simpsons has been the most streamed franchise on Disney Plus since day one. It is the most watched thing on there. Not a Marvel show. I think Mandalorian is creeping up next to it finally. But overall, people watch The Simpsons on Disney Plus nonstop by a large margin. But my biggest takeaway from The Simpsons, and what I want to end is, you're going to feel something when you watch The Simpsons, at least those first 13-ish seasons before it goes fully off the rails. It is always really good at that balancing act of absurdist ridiculousness, but very genuine, heartfelt stuff, because at the core, it's still about a family, and you're still going to have those moments that gut punch you, like Homer thinking he's going to die, or in later seasons when things happen where people are hurt or having to go places, and they're played for laughs, but can't hang out with his friends for the summer. And I'm laughing at it, but there's also like, you see the isolation and what it's doing to him. They play that for laughs a bit, but also he's just lonely and sad. He can't be with his friends. And as a kid, that hit me. I watched it again as an adult. I was like, crap, it hit me again because we were in the middle of COVID and I was isolated from all my friends and I felt that. And you're always going to feel something for the most part in the Simpsons episode. They always make sure to hit you with something on top of all the laughs. And it's not even like one of those, if you're paying attention to it, you just have to be open to the vulnerability of it and accept that, yes, this is an absurd, ridiculous cartoon, but it's still going for the heart every now and again. And with all that being said, my favorite Simpsons episode is Marge versus the Monorail. I will die on that hill.
I think probably the most gut-wrenching episode for me is the episodes with Homer and his mom. Jacob, did you survive? And what are your final thoughts here as we get ready to read our show notes?
My final thoughts are there's a lot I haven't seen. I
Poor Jacob.
haven't really had much to add for a while, to be perfectly honest. But yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for letting us try to convert you to The Simpsons. I just want to put out a final reminder that our fundraiser for St. Jude is now powered by Reddit community funds. So that means any donations we receive between now and the end of our fundraiser, April 10th, are going to be doubled on April 10th. And that sounds pretty fantastic to us. And we think our friends at St. Jude are going to enjoy that as well. This has been the Dank Christian Memes podcast. Our Dank Christian Memes is a place for all kinds of Christians and all kinds of non-Christians to enjoy memes and fellowship. If you'd like to connect with our community further, we have social links in the description. Our music is provided by Olive Tiger. Thank you for listening. And until next time, may the memes bless you and keep you.